About a few years ago, this kind of happened to me back in 2016 on Christmas. Now, to cut to the chase, it was around Christmas Eve, and my family and I were excited for the holidays, as it was one of the holidays that we would celebrate as a family. Due to my dad being an asshole, I ended up deciding to spend Christmas with him as much as we could. So, with that being said, it was around 9 o'clock at night, so my mom gave us pajamas and we went to bed. However, I woke up around maybe, I guess you could say around 11 or so at night, and I heard someone or something outside. I looked outside to see who it was, and I could see that it was actually someone that I had no idea what it was. It was a black figure, but I couldn't really see clearly on who or what it was. In my mind, I thought it was Santa Claus, but that was a big problem as well, as it looked like he had what seemed to be a hoodie on. I ended up going over there to my mom and showed her that someone was outside. With that being said, my mom walked over to my bedroom window and looked, but unfortunately she couldn't see the figure anymore. So I had no idea who or what it was, but we looked around the house thinking it could be someone trying to break in our house, as sometimes this occurred in some houses and some cases of people on Christmas Eve when people were asleep. I ended up looking around and seeing my mom, but we couldn't find anybody. And of course, my dad said that it might have been someone just trying to look and breaking in or something. With that being said, we haven't seen it in a very while, and we haven't seen this man, and it's been a few years since that happened. I had no idea what this person's intentions were, but I could really for sure tell you that they weren't good. This happened to a friend of mine, which we'll call her Katie for the sake of the story. Now, Katie was about maybe 20 years old, and she was having her boyfriend over for Christmas, as her boyfriend wasn't having too much to do on Christmas. Now, it was Christmas Eve, and her and her boyfriend were busy, getting things ready for Christmas Day, which will be the next day. But as Katie looked up, she could hear someone or something thumping on the roof. And in her mind, she thought it was Santa, so they were all curious. But as her boyfriend decided to have a look, she couldn't see anybody on the roof. With that being said, she had no idea who or what was on the roof of their house, but he couldn't see anybody. So with that being said, they continued to do their normal thing when they heard thumping on someone else's roof. And this time Katie had a peek, but it was on the decorated house across the street from her, but she couldn't see anybody. Due to how being light up, she couldn't see anyone on the roof. So with that said, she went over to her neighbor's house and asked if she heard the thump on the roof, and they said they hadn't. Now that was very strange, as they asked a few of their neighbors who were still awake if they heard the thump on the roofs of their houses, and they said they haven't. But surprisingly, only Katie and her boyfriend did. And their parents didn't even hear it either. What Katie and her boyfriend experienced that day on Christmas Eve was completely paranormal, but they haven't heard that thumping noise ever since that night, and they still wonder who or what was making that thumping sound on the roof. Okay, so this happened sometime back in 2009 or 2010 when I was in elementary school. But of course this didn't happen to me. It happened to one of my teachers, who will call her Melissa. Melissa was one of the teachers. I guess you could say she was a music teacher, and she did have a daughter who was around 10 or 11, and she even had a son who was around 8 or 9 years old. So with that being said, they owned a cabin in the woods that wasn't far from their area. Of course, it was an hour or so drive, but it was a little cabin in the woods where anything could be light up with electricity, although there were other cabins in the woods for some people who lived there. Now with that said, had been done, Melissa was actually decided to spend Christmas up in the cabin with her husband and her kids, mainly because they haven't done anything like this before, and her husband agreed to the idea. So they drove up there within the next day, shortly after their school had let out for the holidays, so they could get everything set up for the day. So with that being said, Christmas was around the corner, and it wasn't really that far from now, so they had a lot to prepare. Of course, the kids were excited, and by the time they got to the cabin, they unpacked their bags, and as soon as they got settled in, they began to relax in their area in the cabin. Now, with that being said and done, the husband decided to take the kids out to play in the snow, so Melissa decided to join in as well. As they were playing outside in the snow, no, it was around Christmas Eve. It was sometime during the day, and they were surrounded by forests in the area, so it was very likely they couldn't see anybody for miles. Although they have seen some rabbit, coyote, wolf, bear, and other creatures wandering in the forest sometime. However, Melissa's husband could see that there was someone or something big walking in the tree line. In his point of view, it could have been a bear, but he didn't really see what it was. It was a big black figure, standing on all two legs, but he thought maybe it might have been a big bear, so he brushed it off. Melissa saw it too and brushed it off thinking it was a bear. But with that being said, they all ignored it and continued. It wasn't until Christmas morning, well, very early I might add, Melissa was in bed with her husband and her kids when her daughter, which we'll call her Rachel, walked in. "Mommy, I think I see Santa outside," she said. Now, Melissa looked over at her clock, and it looked like it was around 2 or 3 in the morning, but there was no way Santa could be there. But of course, with that being said, Melissa got up and asked Rachel, "Where'd you see Santa?" "He's outside," Rachel said. That's when Melissa ended up looking over. And when she looked outside, she couldn't see anything. Nothing but darkness in the woods, and the only light illuminating the areas were at least the porch light and some other lights around the house. Now, with that being said, Melissa had a feeling that someone or something was watching their cabin. So with that said, Melissa then heard footsteps in the snow. She couldn't really see who or what it was, as it wasn't snowing, but it was light snow though. But of course, Melissa then heard something approaching the front door. She looked over outside, and in shock, she could see that it was a gorilla-like creature. And this is when Rachel was getting nervous. "Is Santa outside?" she asked. "Yes, sweetie, Santa is outside," Melissa told her. And of course, with that said, whatever that gorilla thing was ended up taking off running into the woods, never to be seen again, followed by a disturbing sound. With that said, Rachel asked her mom if that was what Santa made, and she said, It's probably about one of Santa's reindeer, dear sweetie," she said. But of course, after that night, they went to bed, but Melissa couldn't sleep, not even after seeing that creature that was right up near the doorway. Was wondering how would this thing be even Santa. Now, with that said, she never told her daughter or her son about that mysterious creature that she saw. But of course, surprisingly enough, she never told anybody about this story, but only a few teachers and a few students. And with that said, when they go back up to the cabin, they never saw that creature. But she had a feeling it might have been Bigfoot or something. But this was definitely terrifying. Now, a few years ago, this happened to one of my uncles when he was in Calgary back in 2015. Now, my uncle was getting ready for the Christmas holidays as he was alone and had no family to be spending time with, but a good friend of his was going to come and spend Christmas with him for that year. Now, in 2015, my uncle was driving home from seeing a friend who was having a Christmas party up north from Calgary. On his way back to Calgary, however, he had to take a back road since one of the roads were closed due to construction. So as he was taking the route down, he ended up looking up to notice that there was someone or something walking in the middle of the road. He honestly had no idea who or what it was, but it honestly looked like if anyone had ever ever been so unsure of himself. He had no idea who it was, but it looked like someone was not really that crazy. Now, with this person, it looked like about maybe be a man, about maybe a few feet tall. And so my uncle pulled over, and the guy had his car there. So my uncle asked, "Hey, do you need help?" But this guy said nothing. He said for a moment, "Oh, no, thank you. I'm just waiting for a tow," he said. My uncle insisted that he could have a look, and he said sure. And as my uncle was having a look, he ended up looking over to see that something was not right in the woods. It was a back road, and there weren't any really many houses that lived on this area. But then he could see at least a few people emerging from the woods. That indicated my uncle that he needed to get the hell out of there. He got back in his car saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta go. I'm really late." Of course, the guy who he agreed to help frowned, but of course, my uncle jumped into the car and drove off. He didn't even look back until he was for certain he was on the main road. As soon as he got to the main road and looked back, he couldn't see anybody, but he had no idea what the hell happened. Of course, on the news on Christmas Eve, my uncle watched it, and of course, it said that a young man in his mid 40s was murdered by a group of people, and he was robbed, as this guy asked if he could look at his vehicle. Now, that was the same area that my uncle was almost killed that night. I have no idea what would have happened to him if he stayed any longer. God only knows what those people could have done to him. Probably kill him and rob him, but I really have no idea what this guy was planning to do to my uncle. But I'm glad this didn't happen, as my uncle wouldn't be home for Christmas that year if he had stayed any longer. And I'm glad he got out of there as soon as he noticed something was not right at all. I just thank God that my uncle was around till the day he died, which was sometime in 2018. But I still am glad that my uncle got out of there, as something could have happened to him if he did stay any longer than that guy already did. I feel bad for the guy who actually got killed and robbed, but there are some sick people out there that could ruin your life within minutes. All it takes is one person.